Sometimes people forget that the iPhone, on top of being a very good phone, is also a very, very good photography camera. You may not believe me, but these are, in fact, pictures taken with an iPhone. You can see great colors, incredible dynamic range, and thanks to its 48 megapixel resolution, an incredible amount of detail. In this video, I'm going to show you all of the little settings you need to change to make the most out of your iPhone, because this, with the right adjustments, is an incredible camera. But anyways, that being said, let's begin by coming here to the Settings app, then swiping down to the Camera subsection, and then tapping right here on Formats. As you can see, there are two main formatting options for photos. We have high efficiency, which is going to compress your images a little bit more, resulting in smaller files that are good for saving space, but that also lack a little bit of quality because of that extra compression. And then we have most compatible, which is going to give you less compressed files that are going to be, of course, more heavy. They are going to take up more space, but that are also going to give you a little bit more quality, both in photos and videos. That's something you should know. If you enable most compatible, it will apply to photos and videos, and same for high efficiency. Now, as you can see here in photo mode, we have the option to choose between 12 megapixels and 24 megapixels. This only applies to the cameras on your phone that have 48 megapixels, and that therefore can bin down to 12 or 24. Now, something very interesting is that here in photo mode, you can choose between 12 and 24, but if you want to access the full 48 megapixel resolution, you have to activate Pro RAW and resolution control. And then once that's done, you'll see there's a new option on the camera app, this one right here, JPEG Max, which if you turn on by tapping on it, as you can see now it's turned off. If I tap again, it will automatically turn on. Now I am going to be able to take 48 megapixel photos with the cameras that have 48 megapixels, which in this case, as I said, are the ultra wide and the main camera. Now that said, there's a little bit more customization you can do for your 48 megapixel photos. So if you tap on Pro Default, as you can see, you get the option to choose between JPEG Max and Pro RAW Max up to 48 megapixels. With JPEG Max being the more user-friendly option, that's, yes, going to give you a lot of resolution and quality, but in a compressed file that doesn't take up that much space, and Pro RAW Max being the full uncompressed file that is going to take up a lot of space, but is therefore going to give you the best image quality possible. Now, if you choose the JPEG Max option, which is the one that I recommend, you also get three options for the type of compression. So you get JPEG Lossless, which is going to be the highest quality JPEG Max, the closest therefore to Pro RAW Max. Then you get JPEG XL Lossless, which is a nice middle ground. And then you get JPEG XL Lossy, which is the most compressed, the smallest file, but also the least quality 48 megapixel photo you can take. Now, just so you can have a reference on how much of a change you can get between 12 and 48 megapixels, this is a JPEG 12 megapixel compared to a JPEG 48. And as you can see, if we zoom in, there is actually a noticeable difference in quality. The 12 megapixel photo is a lot softer and has a lot less detail. But when we compare that same 48 megapixel JPEG photo to a 48 megapixel Pro RAW photo, there is not that big of a difference. I mean, if we zoom in a lot, technically you can see maybe a little bit more quality on the Pro RAW Max photo, but it's such a small difference that I just don't think it justifies the files being 4 times bigger. But anyways, that being said, let's come back here to the main camera settings page and tap right here on Preserve Settings. This particular settings page is very important because, like the name suggests, it is going to let you preserve the settings on your camera app even if you close it or if you turn off your phone. So as many of you probably know, by default, if I apply any change to the camera app, like adding a little bit of zoom to the main camera, and then I leave and close the camera app, when I come back, the app is going to be back to normal. I'm not going to have those changes retained from the last time that I used the camera. And that is exactly why we have the preserve settings page on the phone. So as you can see, we have the option to preserve the camera mode, the controls menu, photographic styles, creative controls, and many, many more things. So in this case, you can tweak around and see which things you want to keep opened. But personally, in my case, I find camera mode, controls menu, and exposure adjustments to be the essential ones you always want to turn on. But anyways, back here to the main camera settings, we also have the option to use the volume up button for burst, which is pretty self-explanatory. If you press the volume up button, you are going to take a burst of photos. Then you have the option to scan QR codes, which I always recommend you turn on. You have the option to show detected text on your images, which again, I always recommend you turn on. And right here on composition, we have what I consider to be the most important settings to turn on your phone: grid and level. These things are essentials to take good photos and videos. Okay, so I'm not really sure if you can see it, but the level is this line right here in the middle that helps you compose your shot so it's perfectly vertical or perfectly horizontal. And then the grid lines are these 2x2 lines separating the display in 9 squares that help you compose your shots infinitely better. Now down here, you also have the option to mirror the front camera, which is basically going to flip the photos you take with the selfie camera so they look like what you see in the mirror. Then you have the option to view outside the frame, which is a little gimmick in the camera app. I don't think it matters if you turn it on or off. And then down here on photo capture, you have the option, if you choose on Fusion camera, to tap on default to 24 millimeters, default to 28, or default to 35. So by default, your main camera on your iPhone, unless you have an old iPhone, is going to have a 24 millimeter focal length. So the photos you take, unless you digitally zoom in on the picture, are going to have a 24 millimeter focal length. But if you have a recent iPhone and therefore a 48 megapixel main sensor, you can actually choose to tap on the 1x button right here to slightly zoom in to get a 28 millimeter aspect ratio or a 35 millimeter aspect ratio, which is going to give you a different photographic look. Now, the cool thing about this is that they are not digitally zooming in on the image like you would normally do with the traditional 12 megapixel cameras, but they are actually cropping in on the sensor to take full resolution. I think it's 24 megapixel resolution, 28 millimeter photos and 35 millimeter photos. So even if you zoom in, you're actually not losing any resolution. Now, as you can see, you have the option to choose a default, whether it is 24, 28, or 35. And you also have the option to disable either 28 or 35 if you don't want to accidentally tap on the 1x button and switch to either one of those. But in my opinion, I suggest you turn it on because it is going to give you a lot of creative control over the way your pictures look, as opposed to what you traditionally had with these options turned off. Now down here, you have the option to tap on portraits in photo mode, which is a must in my opinion. It is basically going to capture the depth information necessary to create portrait photos with every photo you take. So you never have to use the portrait mode and commit to a portrait looking photo. So to say, you can take normal photos and then afterwards, if you feel like it, you can enable the portrait mode on specific photos where you feel like it would benefit that specific image. Now down here, pay close attention, we have another option that affects image quality on the phone. In this case, it is called prioritize faster shooting. And well, like the name suggests, when it is turned on, it is basically going to prioritize taking faster photos, even if it affects the image quality. So when the option is turned on, you're going to take photos very fast, but the quality of those photos may get affected. They may be less quality. And when you turn it off, which I actually think it comes turned on by default for some reason, so turn it off, you are going to take photos a little bit slower, but you are going to ensure that each one of those photos has the highest quality possible because you are going to prioritize quality instead of faster shooting. Now down here you have lens correction, which I always recommend you turn on because it is going to correct the distortion of the edges of your images when you use the ultra-wide camera. As you can see in this side-by-side, we have an ultra-wide picture taken without lens correction and the same picture taken with lens correction. And even though it is not very, very noticeable, there is a slight difference in the quality of the edges when the option is turned on. So if you want the best quality images possible, once again, I recommend you turn it on. Now here on the camera app, there's actually not a lot to do, mainly because it is meant for auto mode. Everything is going to be in auto, so you don't have to do anything. But there's two things that you can do that are going to result in slightly better quality images. The first one is by tapping on the 0, 0 right here at the top left, which actually enables the exposure controls on your camera. By default, usually phones overexpose with images and videos, so even the shadows have detail. But this usually results in a flatter, less quality, less professional looking photo or video. So what I usually do is I lower the exposure to minus 0.3, or minus 0.7, so the photos look a little bit more contrasty, a little bit more rich, and a little bit more dense, so to say, which is a more professional look. Now, of course, you can always leave it at 0 and do the exposure change in post-production, but ideally, you want to make the most amount of changes before you take the picture, so you don't have to edit the image as much, because when you edit the image, usually you lose a little bit of quality. So if you do the changes before, the image is going to look better. And well, the second thing you can do to improve your photos is to tap on this button right here at the top right to get access to your photographic styles, which are basically filters. You know, Apple likes to call things fancy names so they feel more professional. It is basically customizable filters. So as you can see, you get some default options: natural, luminous, dramatic, quiet, you know, your basic filter selection that we get on pretty much every phone. But the cool thing is that we can select a different intensity for that filter. They usually are very obvious, very loud, and very cheap, so to say. But by reducing the intensity, usually to half or 50%, sometimes even less if the filter is very intense, you can actually get a much more professional result than if you leave it at 100% intensity. But anyways, that said, we have the settings, we have the camera interface tweaks. I believe the last thing you need to take the best quality images possible is to tweak one or two things after you take the picture. So if you come to the editing tab on any image and you tap on adjust, you can actually tweak the image to make it look a little bit better. And I know this may be a little intimidating because there's many options, you don't really know what each does, and you fear that you are going to make the image worse. But if you make the right tweaks, which are not many and are pretty simple to apply, you can get a much better looking image. So the things that I always recommend you change when you take a picture with a phone are, first of all, let's come here to shadows. This is the first thing. I always increase the shadows a little bit because phones tend to raise the shadows a little too much. Then I recommend you increase the contrast a little bit. Then you can actually change the warmth of your images to give them a warmer look or a cooler look, depending on the style or the vibe you're looking for. Then I suggest you never increase the sharpness, you never increase definition. These things are going to make your photos look cheap. And then, depending on the image, and be careful, you can actually get a very professional looking result if you add a little bit of vignetting to your image. So as you can see, it is this weird effect where the edges of the image get darkened out as opposed to the rest of the image. And if you use it with moderation, you can actually get some very interesting and appealing results for your images. But anyways, that said, I believe those are all of the settings and tweaks you need to know to take the best quality photos possible with your iPhone, whichever iPhone it is, because you don't really need the latest model to take some impressive looking images. In fact, the images that I showed at the beginning of the video were not really taken with the iPhone 16 Pro. Some were taken with the 14 Pro, the 13 Pro. So yeah, if you have a recent iPhone that is not like an iPhone 5 or an iPhone 6, you can take some very, very good looking images if you apply the settings that I showed in this video and you practice a little bit. But anyways, that said, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope to see you again in the next one.